In early February 1989, a man got into his car in his native hometown Rotorua and drove to the city of Auckland, New Zealand. The journey from Rotorua to Auckland took 3 hours, which is normal. When he got to his destination, he was met with cheers, sadness, happiness, anxiety, and every form of positive emotion from the people that greeted him. Even the police came around to see him. He was confused with this newfound celebrity status. He asked what the whole ruckus was all about, and that's when he was told that he had been missing for 10 days. How did a 3-hour journey turn into a journey that lasted 10 days? This was the question that only the man, Alec Newald, could answer. The only problem was that Alec had no idea where he had been or how he had been missing for 10 days. When worried family members asked him where he had been, he was unable to give a clear answer. To top it off, he started suffering from terrible headaches, tiredness, and had trouble focusing. This was beginning to be the norm for Alec until he started remembering. Bit by bit, and finally he remembered what happened. And his revelation was shocking to not just his family, but to the whole world. It turns out, Alec was abducted by aliens.
I was driving the car one minute and the next the car was nowhere to be seen, and it didn't feel like I had a body, actually. That's where the death scenario comes into it. I felt totally as if I'd been put through a sieve. I think I mentioned that in the book. It felt like all the solid parts had been sifted out, and here I was in a sort of a glowing or a ghost-like entity drifting around, not really touching the ground, and having no walls of any description around me in a huge space, and all there was sort of, in the far distance, were some ghost-like entities. And
that was an interview where he described his abduction. Alec originally thought he was dead, and it was his spirit going from this world to the next. Then several weird-looking creatures appeared in front of him. At first, he thought they were ghosts, but they looked really weird that the idea of ghosts didn't sound plausible. The creatures looked very thin, about average height, and had big heads and eyes that were very narrow. When compared to humans, their faces were bigger. It was then it dawned on him that these were aliens. This is how they look. Even though they didn't say anything with their mouth, Alec could feel them in his head right away, like they were telepathically talking to him. "Welcome," he said. "I am the designated guardian of this section. Anything that you feel you might need to make your stay with us more pleasant, ask and I shall do my best to supply it. The suit you have been given will make it possible for you to understand us, and us you." That was what one of the aliens said to him. The alien told him he would not stop Alec if he wished to leave, but hoped he stay because they were willing to share so much knowledge about, well, everything to guide us. After this encounter, he was taken to their city, which Alec described in his book as being so neat and large that he could not make up their boundaries. Yes, he wrote a book about his experience titled Coevolution, an Interplanetary Adventure. A quick search on Google and you will see where you can buy the book, and read more on his adventure and experience. Alec's description of the alien city made the building on Earth look small in comparison. There may well be bigger cities on Earth, but where I come from, this place would be rated big. Very big. It stretched out in both directions, following the coastline out of my line of sight. There seemed to be only a thin strip of land that was not coastline or desert, and the city was sandwiched within it. The last thing really to make an impact upon me was the lack of tall buildings, save for the odd tower or two, and the dominance of small circular shapes among a few larger pyramid-shaped constructions. They appeared to be made from a material that looked just like tinted glass or semi-transparent plastic. I couldn't quite see the apex of these buildings from my vantage point, but later I was to find that they were capped with a spiral tower or antenna arrangement. The height of the tower added approximately 25% to the building's overall height. Each building in turn was topped with what I can only describe as a large light bulb. In his book, Alec made drawings of the building he saw. He went on and on about the architecture of the buildings he saw, even describing the house and room he was staying in, and he was stunned by its beauty. But sightseeing wasn't the major reason why he was abducted. It was for the aliens to pass knowledge on to him, so that in turn, he would pass that same knowledge to others. According to the aliens, Earth's history has a lot of stories that have never been told. Most of this information about Earth's true history is now carefully guarded by a small group of hidden sects that are actively keeping this information from ever reaching the public. When reading that part, I wouldn't lie. It made sense to me. There are a lot of things about our universe only a select few know about, and the public is just left to fill in the gaps to the best of their abilities. However, these sects were not always secret when they were given this information. The original plan was for this ancient information to be shared with everyone, but I guess plans changed. The alien talked about two species of the human race, Homo sapiens and the Cro-Magnon. Apparently, both Homo sapiens and the Cro-Magnon precursor species were created by humans. Around 70,000 years ago, the last pieces of the Cro-Magnon puzzle were put together. The Cro-Magnon was not the first humanoid that lived on Earth, but it was the first one that was designed to be a receiver or container so that a second bodiless being could live with it and experience physicality through its host's solid outer body form. You know how almost every religion on Earth believes that the body is different from the spirit or soul? Christianity believes in saving your soul and not letting your flesh or your body dictate your life. The same applies to Islam, and is why some misguided people twist it to make people commit suicide bombings. Because they believe their souls will be redeemed, and that this body is just nothing more than a container.
Our real life starts after doomsday, so this is not our real life. This world is a paradise for pagans and a hell for Muslims. We just need to be patient.
Which is almost the same thing that the aliens were telling Alec. After the Cro-Magnon, they made a new species that they could remember everything that was saved for them and use it at any time in the future. That is, its mental capabilities were already fully formed, and it didn't need any more improvements or evolutionary changes at that point. All the knowledge that would ever be needed by this race, up until its next evolutionary step, was already present on the planet and in the safekeeping of the trustees, which Alec believes to be the Homo sapiens. The one alien that revealed most of this information was a female alien known as Xena. She told Alec about how some of her people came to Earth, how some stayed back, while others moved on. Even the pyramids are ancient legacies left behind by some of her ancestors to help awaken us when the time is right. She talks about how the Earth is special and beautiful, and because of that, there are a lot of external forces that desire Earth for their own purpose. At this moment, reading the book, I kept seeing Darkseid from DC Comics, or Loki from Marvel's Avengers. One riveting thing she shared and kept me wondering was about a dark force who came to Earth. The dark force wanted Earth for itself and got it. In such, according to Xena, the dark force is still among us. After this force won your planet, it realized it would have a continuous fight on its hands for you. Were not as you are now. You were well on your way to enlightenment, with a very strong spiritual base. You were actually almost as strong as this force itself. It had to trick you in order to master you. And while you were down, it altered your makeup, your very structure, your DNA, in fact. It crippled you and stunted you, and set you back many thousands of years. It made you into what you are today, which is only a portion of the greatness you can be, for you have not yet fully recovered. And if that force has its way, you never will. That force is known to most as the force of darkness, for it is indeed the enemy of enlightenment. It is in the air that you breathe and everywhere about you. It has aligned itself to the planet and you. Now, reading this part, I couldn't help but again draw similarities between different cultures that talked about how advanced humans were in the past, but war, greed, lust, and the dark heart of men made us lose so much. The Bible talks about a race of humans that were superior to everything until the Apple incident. And this alien just echoed her own version of it. A lot of mind-boggling narratives were shared between the two. She talked about an underwater base where she and her people live on Earth, and also how she is in contact with people in power, sharing knowledge with them to share with the rest of mankind. But they deemed that the population was not ready for the message. If I don't believe anything in this story, I highly believe that one. Again, a lot of intriguing narratives with supposed proof and facts that make you question a lot of things. I can't cover all of them. It would make this video way longer than it should. But you can get the book for yourself and read up on it. Finally, after the riveting encounters, history lessons, ephemeral sightseeing, and rides in a spaceship, yes, he was given a ride in a spaceship, and also lengthy talks about sex. Yes, that was also talked about. He was sent back to Earth, to the same location he was before the abduction. This would explain why to him he felt time never passed, because he was in the same car. But in reality, he had just spent 10 days on an alien planet. When Alec released just a snippet of this information to the public, what happened to him next was nothing short of a thriller movie. There were no words that could describe the events that happened to him next. The police, the SIS, the scientists, the CIA, everyone wanted to know about these aliens Alec talked about, and they weren't asking nicely. He started noticing things. He was being followed. The same car he had never seen before was all of a sudden parked at the end of his street, just 2 houses before him. He decided to move to a new place and environment, but he was still followed. When they couldn't follow him anymore, they decided to make contact with him and ask him questions. At one time, he was weakly accused of being a Nazi just because his father's ancestry could be traced back to Germany. Meanwhile, he has lived in New Zealand all his life. A funny accusation to Alec at the time. They said they could make life very uncomfortable for me if I was uncooperative. However, there didn't appear to be anything they could do to me at that stage, so I said, "Thanks very much for the friendly advice," and shut the door in their faces. That was another grave mistake on my part. And it was. All of a sudden, Alec's life seems to be going from one bad experience to the other, all set up by these institutions. Alec had been a motor vehicle dealer, at least until 1987, until the stock market crash no longer made that a viable trade in New Zealand. Even though he was no longer a licensed motor vehicle dealer per se, he would still buy and sell the odd car privately. One day he met a gentleman at a well-known car auction in Auckland City. He said his name was Jeff Wright and that he had access to cheap Japanese secondhand, imported cars, which were wholesale stock that was not required or was surplus to dealer needs, and he was looking to sell it. There was no reason for Alec to doubt what Jeff said, and after some investigation on Alec's end, decided Jeff was telling the truth, so he entered into a business with Jeff. They worked together for 9 months. Jeff would ring Alec whenever he had a car that he thought he might be interested in buying. Sometimes he would buy them. Other times, if he didn't have the money, Alec would turn them down. Little did Alec know all this was a trap to set him up. Apparently, the cars Jeff had been supplying Alec were all stolen, or so it appeared to the court. There were 6 cars involved in this setup. The police got so enthusiastic about it all that they even tried to prosecute him for cars that were not stolen. But he was in trouble, which was perfect for the agencies. The agencies had done a fairly good job. They cunningly let me stew on things for quite some time before they visited me again. It was just as you would expect. Cooperate, and we will fix things up for you with the police. I was determined to ride their bluff to the end. Alec was still stubborn, and his case, which shouldn't last at most 6 months, took up to 2 years, with recurring court appearances, over 20 in total. These people were meticulous and seemed to be able to reach into every corner of my life. There was no doubt they had done this type of thing before, but to whom and for what reasons? How many before me had been subjected to the same fate? I was rapidly losing faith in every part of our so-called justice system. I knew it was just a game for them, but this was my life they were playing with. Alec was broke, his assets taken away. He didn't even have money to hire a lawyer. All these were just to make Alec talk about his interactions with the aliens. All that he learned, but for some reason, Alec said no to them. After 2 years of the case, he lost. I had to serve half of my 12-month sentence following the trial. What it meant, in fact, was plenty of time to reappraise my situation with regard to writing this story in all its detail. It was no longer a private affair. The world had a right to know. And that was what prompted him to write his book. So, even if this was all fiction and made up, why did the agency try so much to make him talk? This was before he published his book. The only logical argument was that they believed Alec's statement and wanted the information from him so badly. Heck, if they could kidnap him and take him to a black site, they'd probably do that. But does that mean Alec is telling the truth? Did he really meet aliens? The truth is, this sounds more like fiction than reality. Alec's claim that humans are related to aliens and that aliens are related to humans from the future and know how to move through time is interesting. The ETs Alec met are almost extinct because of choices their ancestors, people from Earth, made. So they regularly go back in time to change things for the better in the present so they can make their own lives better, which is amazing and similar to almost all sci-fi stories. On top of all that, Alec writes in his book about a relationship he had with a female alien that he says was out of this world beautiful, both in a physical and figurative sense.
It sort of froze when this thing sort of, if it had a face, was looking at me.
Like I said earlier, there were lengthy talks about reproduction. But that's not what makes me raise an eyebrow. It's this story.
I was actually walking a ley line. I was walking a dragon line to school, or intersecting one. And right on this park, on that dragon line, was where just like a lightning strike, it'd be a flash of light would come in that park and would draw my attention to it. And the thing that was happening around me at the time, people say, "Oh, well, how could you possibly go into a vortex or something without anyone seeing you?" Being a kid, you chase seagulls and that, when you're young. And in the park, because this was close to a harbour, an estuary, and there were seagulls in this park, and I used to chase them. And whenever that light in that park would glow, seagulls in the park would freeze. So there was some sort of a time interference pattern set up there where obviously my time wasn't altered, and the beings that came out of that light didn't alter their movement, but everything around me was obviously frozen. So I could only imagine that anybody outside of that perimeter of that vortex was probably, my time was probably at 1,000 or 100,000 times quicker than theirs. So I should imagine that.
That interview is an hour long. The link to watch the whole thing is in the description below. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he had witnessed a UFO event. He had an experience as a child where he was the only one to see aliens. I mean, all of a sudden he remembers his encounters with aliens when he was a child. I don't know, it just sounds too fishy to me. And of course, to know more about this encounter, you had to wait and buy his third version of the book. The story he tells in that interview has a lot of holes. Why was he the only one who witnessed these aliens in the park? He claims the stuff was random and occurs rarely, but then again, in the same statement, talks about how the seagulls would freeze whenever the lights glow. He talks like this happens normally, or he has experienced this phenomenon more than once, and at the same, it was his first time. Didn't make sense at all. He even claims to have been prepped by the aliens when he was younger, trying to build a history of his life before his famous abduction, to create a narrative that he was predestined for that very event that happened in his life. Like a prequel to a good movie.
I was being schooled from that age of 5, so you could sort of kind of tell there was something going to happen later on in my life which they were trying to prep me for, I guess. So even though you just accept these things as a 5-year-old, I just forgot about that stuff in later adult life. I mean,
Now, I am not saying with an accurate fact that aliens don't exist or rebutting the countless claims from others. The universe is too big to be the only one in it. But regarding Alec Newald's story, there are just a lot of holes that raise my eyebrows. His actual abduction experience sounds riveting and real, considering the information shared in his book. But when you involve the experience he had as a child, an experience he claims to have forgotten, into the mix, the story starts to lose its hold and makes you wonder if he was actually abducted or he is just a good writer. Because I won't lie, the book is a good read, and even if you don't believe in his story of being abducted, the book itself makes a quite good fiction novel. Either way, I leave you with a word from Lord Admiral Hill Norton, former head of the British Ministry of Defence and chairman of the NATO Military Committee. There is a serious possibility that we are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer space, by other civilizations. Who they are, where they are from, and what they want should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not be the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers. So what do you think? Was he abducted, or is he just a great writer?